I'm going to go ahead and start recording. Feel free to ask questions as we go through this. I'm just going to essentially start and dive into our demo here once we get settled. So I'm going to be using some graphite for this demonstration. I'm primarily going to be working with my full set here. This is primarily a drawing set, so meaning that it's more targeted towards like values. So we're going to see 2H in this category, and we're going to see all the way up to 9B. Now, some of this also might be review at the beginning. At the very beginning of our class, all the way back, week 1, week 2, I had a couple of videos posted on working with graphite and working with charcoal. I just reviewed one of those videos too for Project 4, working with charcoal. But I talked about graphite at the very beginning of class and gave you direction on maybe the spectrum or scale of graphite to work with. And I also gave you some historical information, some material information, and ways to approach the drawing utensil and the way you might hold your utensil in comparison to your body, and think about the position of subject relationship, also in pictorial ground relationship. So make sure to rewatch that if you're kind of confused or maybe lost in that section when you're like, I don't know what she's talking about. That video is posted at some of the beginning projects, so feel free to rewatch this. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to grab a couple of pencils here. I'm going to grab primarily, of course, my 9B's totally broke. That makes sense. I'm going to grab my 2H pencil, okay? So hopefully you can see that. I'm going to grab my 2H and I'm going to grab my 9B. I'm also going to be grabbing an F pencil to draw with on the side, or maybe my B. And then I'm going to have to go just erase or sharpen my pencil real quick. So I'll be back in just a hot second. All right. Okay. So I've got a pencil set up here. So we're going to start talking about the basic kind of principles with drawing. With graphite, and we're going to also apply this to charcoal. Any of the techniques and methods that we're going to review today can definitely be transferred over to charcoal. The only reason I'm doing this in drawing, or with graphite pencil, excuse me, is primarily because it's going to be a little bit cleaner. I'm going to be dragging my hand a lot, and that's just the way I draw, and I'm not going to want to cover up too much of my drawing so you can see what I'm doing. So it's just a little bit neater for me to do, and we'll get into a little bit more technical information with graphite. So like I said, I just want to do a little bit of review on it as well. But all this information can be definitely transformed and essentially applied with charcoal, okay? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about pencils, right? So we're going to just do a little pencil demo up front. So I'm just going to write pencil up top. Hopefully you guys can read my terrible handwriting, so sorry about that. It's just always been a little messy, so we're just going to have to get over it. And essentially we're going to talk about the nature of graphite. So what I'm going to do is take my 2H pencil. So I'm going to just write 2H. And then I'm going to essentially just create a back and forth line with my pencil. And I'm going to go over this maybe 3 times. And I'm putting a heavy amount of pressure onto my material with my hand. Okay? So you should have a little block looking something like this. 2H pencil, right? We can see that value. And then I'm going to go ahead and take my 9B. And I'm going to basically rinse and repeat that idea. So 9B, I'm going to write that above. And then I'm going to start drawing with my pencil at pretty comfortable angle. And I'm going to go back over it and applying a decent amount of pressure. My lead is broken too, so I'm going to have to draw with it a little bit of a weirder angle. There we go. All right. Didn't quite put it to 3. It's okay. So we're going to be able to see some noticeable differences in value. And this information is going to be slightly, you're going to be able to apply this to charcoal as well. Essentially, we're going to talk about this spectrum of graphite. So essentially when you're making a graphite pencil, it's made out of 2 main components. Of course, there could be some variation here, but the predominant recipe for graphite, especially graphite pencils, is that it has a binding agent and the actual graphite powder made into it. And then it's pressed and then even woven into or pressed into a core like a pencil here and then put into a wood canister or filler, or it's pressed into a graphite stick. So essentially graphite The binding agent that makes the graphite pencil hard is clay. So essentially when you have H's, that's going to stand for hard. So harder marks, which is going to actually make a lighter line, a lighter value. And so I want you to think about, when you're thinking about graphite, I want you to essentially think about a spectrum or a scale, essentially, of graphite. So I'm just going to draw a little scale down here, a little spectrum, if you will. All right, and then I'm going to be able to just draw my 2H right there and just plug that in. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my 9B down here, which is broken. So I'm going to technically do something else. And the reason I'm showing you this and talking about this is because this is really important for understanding how to create marks in the future. And like I said, a lot of this information might be review for some of you, but I want to review it because when we start working with graphite pencils too in the near future, you're going to have to know how to switch that value scale. Now, if we're working in the context of charcoal, you're going to have different value weights with some of your charcoal. Like particularly for me, I've got some medium and soft charcoal pencils, as well as I've got compressed and vine charcoal. Your vine charcoal is going to be able to put down a lighter value. It's also going to be less stable on the page, meaning that you can blow it off or erase it really easily. Your compressed charcoal has a binding agent in it, so it's going to be either mixed with a gum arabic or a chalk pastel ground with graphite powder, then it's pressed, so it makes a darker mark. Now, within that, you can get some variation between the way the binding agent is being mixed, the way it's being pressed, all that good stuff, which can create a medium or a scale too. So softer graphite is going to put, or charcoal, excuse me, is going to put down a harder, not a harder, but a darker, blacker line, okay? Medium's going to put an in-between line, get some medium range values. And then a hard pencil or a hard charcoal is going to put down less material, okay? So your B on your pencils, getting back to graphite here, is going to stand for black. So that's going to essentially be really easy to remember. And you can think about H as hard, and you can think about B as black. So we can write that in too. So we can understand that gradient. Now, where you start to get those in-between values are like 2 H's, 2 B's, F's and H's, right? So you might find some nuance of that gray value or medium value, just say medium here or mid, in between those H's, F's, and even 2 B's. All right. Now, most kind of standardized mechanical pencils operate with 2B. 2B pencils are pretty standard, and they provide a nice little medium range value, and you can also get pretty dark with them. So when in doubt, you can also sketch with those as well. So this is going to give us our context for how we can start to play with value. Of course, you can also apply heavier pressure or lighter pressure. I also want to warn you about your H's. If you push a lot of pressure onto an H pencil, sometimes it can actually scar your paper, creating a type of embedded mark. So when you erase that line away, it will actually create that kind of darker scarred mark into the paper. So when you go over it maybe with other valued pencils in the future, you might see some of that creased line. So when working with H pencils, you typically want to use less pressure because, like I said, sometimes you can actually end up scarring the page, and that can be detrimental further down the line when you need to add in other values on top, okay? All right. So good lesson, good review. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to start talking about blending techniques. So our first blending technique, and I'm just going to grab a pencil here, is going to be parallel hatching. So I'm just going to type or write out blending, yeah, and mark making. All right. Get us in our new category. Once again, all of these techniques that we're going to review are going to be, you can translate all this information over to charcoal. All right, I'm going to do parallel. Oh, shit, sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. Parallel hatching.
Hey, Professor, is there a way to turn off that lower half of your screen so we can see your screen better?
Sorry. Okay. Sorry. All right. I don't think we're going to be able to get through all this today. Okay. Okay. Hopefully everybody can see me okay. Let me know if you can't see me. We're going to go ahead and just start doing some parallel hatching. So essentially parallel hatching is just creating lines that are going in a parallel direction. This can be either horizontal or vertical. or diagonal. I'm going to do these in two different pencil mediums so you can see kind of the quality difference. I'm going to bring this up to the screen. So of course, you're going to have different thicknesses and also different media applications just based on the material or weight that you're using, especially with graphite. The same information is going to apply to, especially if you're using a light, a hard or a soft charcoal, or vine or compressed. Okay, so you need to think about too how it's going to disseminate or disperse on the page. All right, so we can kind of see what that looks like. Our next big one that we're going to review is going to be a contour hatching mark. So this is something that we can learn from previous projects where we take our line and we kind of wrap it around a form. And that's why those contour line drawings that I had you do all the way back a couple weeks ago are so, so important, because once again, line is a great directional tool. And I want you to use that when you create blended marks or forms because it's going to be extremely helpful for creating line and form richness with your textures and your shading, okay? So you really want to think about contour lines as not only lines to create, oh shoot, I did this wrong, lines to create movement, but also to create texture and depth with your shading. And we can see too, once again, thinking about that Gestalt philosophy, closure happening. And notice how we're maybe not even closing this space off, but it starts to look maybe like a tube, right? Just because I'm using that contour line, right? So once again, there's no line above here, but yet we're closing this space off and we're implying that this is a curvilinear, maybe tube-like structure. So think about too, if you have objects like a lamp or I don't know, any kind of round surface, right? If you're drawing tape, you're going to be able to use those contours of the lines to create really nice shading as you go back into space. Specifically over here, we see that light getting really dark over here. Use contour lines to wrap around your tape with those really beautiful round ellipse lines, and it's going to just create a beautiful texture and a beautiful shaded mark. So once again, contour hatching could be a really powerful tool, especially for your drawings when you start shading with them, okay? So I want you to use that and incorporate that. All right, number 3, we're going to do cross hatching. Now this is pretty common. Everybody knows about cross hatching marks, but we like to review. So a cross hatch mark is essentially creating a T or an X-like shape with your marks. So once again, we can think about contour and cross contour line drawings. Essentially, it's going to be the same concept. Now, of course, you can make these lines closer to one another. You can make them further apart. But you're going to be able to see that how that generates a value and how that creates a really nice stable mark, especially when you start to overlap some of these forms, right? You can get really nuanced with them and even go back and forth with different types of pencil weights to create different value changes and different nuance. All right? Okay. Our 4th one is going to be fine cross hatch marks. Essentially, this is just a variation on the cross hatch. We're going to put an emphasis on that fine. Essentially, what this means is you're going to kind of stack your line really close to one another. So meaning that the space between them is going to be very little. Very little distinction. And this could be really great for any kind of fine, softer value. If you want to create more realism, you can start to stack your mark really close to one another. So it has this beautiful kind of plane of value that it creates. And of course, once again, you can go over in an X or T kind of fashion, or you can layer on top, or even combine different types of materials or spectrums of your utensil, whether that's charcoal or whether that's graphite, to create different types of value within your drawing. So you can see that kind of fine result that I can get, either a plane just by simply stacking that line really close to one another so it's a really well knit space, or I can overstack them quite a bit and create really beautiful kind of harmonies and really subtle gradients. And just look how rich that is, right? That's the power of mark. Mark does so much freaking work for you. So I don't want you to just necessarily go straight for your blending stumps. I want you to make mark, because that's going to make the drawing just like sing, right? Like I said, as artists, as visual artists, we don't have words. We have to use the kind of elements of art and principles of design to give us our adjectives, our nouns, right? Our verbs, those things to grapple onto. So this is the way we cultivate meaning, through mark. All right. Okay, so find crosshair or crosshatch marks. Now we're going to go into a woven hatch. Some people qualify this differently. I was taught woven, so that's the way I like to teach it. So you might see this maybe come up as like basket weaving. I've heard that term before, or weaving marks. But I just like to say woven because I think it's easier. Breaks that space down just a little bit more. What I'm going to do is just essentially create, and this is a style that Vincent van Gogh used quite a bit as well. But essentially you're going to do crosshatch mark sections and create a space in between them. And that's going to be a woven mark. So it's going to look similar to like a basket. And this is going to be able to create a lot of texture. You can also think about creating different pressures with your drawing utensil. And of course, applying different pressure to all of this will give you different value. Or spacing your form out so you can get really nice light subtleties. And of course, if you look at any of Vincent van Gogh's drawings or ink drawings, this is where like he lived, right? This was his shtick. So feel free to go and look at some of those. Maybe I'll show you some of those next class because they're just totally, I mean, just incredible, amazing looking drawings. And of course, you can think about those same concepts about thinking about the proximity of that mark together, how light you push on your material. The distance between it. Oh, look at that beauty, right? Look at all that mark. All right, getting excited about marks over here. All right, we'll move on to 6. That's going to be the tick mark. This is very similar to maybe a stippled mark. Essentially, it's an elongated stipple or dot. Once again, this is another mark that we see a lot in like Vincent van Gogh style of drawings. He used this one quite a bit as well. Essentially, you're just kind of create dot forms that are kind of have these little ticks, right? They've got these little trails under them. And once again, you can think about the material you're using, how hard you're pushing with it, the type of, if it's a high B, if it's a low H, right? How that's going to maybe change that direction. And you can see all of that yummy texture. This can be really great, especially for simulating wood. Some wood grains have a really nice kind of tick mark embedded in them. You can also think about applying this to maybe gourds or pumpkins. Also, too, maybe if you have really textured walls, if you do this really lightly and then maybe go over it with another material or hash mark, man, that can be just totally right. But it's a really active mark. It gives you a lot of texture to hold on to. And you can even think about varying this line. So it's almost like going in different directions. And once again, that talks about that common fate. So you can think about creating marks and value that actually have a common fate and play into that directional line. See, if we start over here, look at how that line's directing our eye upwards. Here it's going up. Here it's moving to the right. So you can also use your line as a directional tool or your shading as a directional tool to help guide you stay in the composition even further. Another layer, right? Another layer. All right, we're going to go ahead and do a stippled mark. This is going to be the last one that we do for our marks. Now, of course, stippling is pretty famous just from pointillism. But essentially, you're just going to draw a series of dots. You can be really active, like I'm doing, where I'm literally just hitting my pencil, almost like a woodpecker, onto the page. And you can create, a variety of different textures and value with this. This one does take time. I am going to say that one. This one is probably more of the lengthier time. Look how beautiful that looks, right? This is really good for, like, if I see areas where you might have like bugs or something in your drawing. This one becomes really interesting. Also, wood grains really work well with this. Salt on a table, right? Things about like little nuance that you can add. You'll also notice too with different types of utensils or materials, you can even start to carve away some of your material with a X-Acto knife or a box cutter, and it will reveal more material. So you can actually start to draw or even shape your material that you're using to create different types of stippled marks, flattening out the edge, creating thicker points. And you can see that difference there, okay? All right, so we're pretty good on marks. We'll see if we can do this quick. I don't think we're going to be able to. We'll see. Maybe I'll talk quick. All right, now we're going to go into a really simple blending techniques. So as we've talked about, your marks should be your number one thing you focus on for value development for your Project 4 drawings, and really any drawings including value. Always think about the mark you're implying, okay? And don't just jump to blending stumps as the alternative. Blending stumps can kill a drawing dead off the bat. And that's one of the biggest mistakes you can make actually in a drawing, is just saying, I'm gonna make a blended drawing with blending stumps, period. And then you lose all this beautiful facture and depth that you can get with your mark. So I want you to really focus on your marks. So I always say this with like a hesitant, like, I'm gonna teach you some of this, but like also like use it wisely, right? Because I think you have this impression, it's like, oh, it's going to speed me up. I can get through this drawing really quick. And it just totally kills your drawing. So, you know, don't think about this as maybe a speeding up technique. Think about this as an enhancement to your drawing arsenal. I'm always really hesitant to introduce blending stumps because I just see it going wrong so often. But it's a good learning opportunity too. If it's too much, then you learn. Okay, so I'm being harsh here, but you know, it's a good learning opportunity too. All right, so I'm gonna make a circle, like a weird peace sign kind of thing. It's upside down. Anyways, okay, so I'm gonna create 6 different zones or quadrants. I want to talk about making a ground plane. And essentially what this is, you can do this really easy with charcoal. It's a little bit easier actually than graphite. But essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a pencil and I'm going to create essentially a fine hash mark. And I'm just going to use the kind of edge of my pencil and I'm going to expose more material. So if you see my hand, pretend this is paper, look at the angle in which I'm drawing. I'm using a large surface of my material to create a larger mark. This is just going to help me create a ground in which I can draw on. Grounding planes are going to be really important, especially for our drawing 4, because they're going to likely end up drawing areas of just really dark value. And it's not going to make sense to draw on a white page, right, and just add all of this mark in tediously and then realize, oh, it's not the right value yet. It's actually easier sometimes just to start off with a darker plane. And a way to do that is just create a ground to work off of. And like I said, you can do this in a variety of different ways. You can blend this with blending stumps to create a ground. You can smear it with some paper towel, or you can just use basic mark like I'm doing with my pencil to fill in an area. And then you can go back over it and create really luscious marks on top using all of this wonderful stuff that we just taught or went over. But essentially thinking about a grounding plane can be really helpful. And I'm speeding through this a little bit, so you might want to like make it not as staggered as I'm doing, right? Like you can see a lot of texture here. You can still work over this and it would be fine, but you know, if you're working on like a really delicate area and you want it to be more realistic, you might think about slowing down and just kind of drawing that in. Now, like I said, with graphite, it's a little bit harder to make this ground as smooth. With charcoal, it's very easy to make a really nice ground. So all you have to do is just lay down content or material and then even blend it with your paper towel. There we go. Paper towel. That's what I'm trying to say. So I'm going to show that too. I'm just going to put some ground down. So once again, I'm just turning this material on its side. And I've got a ground here. Then I'm going to take my material, fold it over, just my regular paper towel. La Viva. All right. And then just create a nice ground. I do this quite a bit in my pumpkin drawing example for Project 4, so if you're looking at that, feel free to do that or look over that. All right, and then we've got a ground there, okay? So this, then you can go over with different materials. You can even go back in and lift up in certain areas, creating a different texture, okay, with your paper towel. And boom, look at that, right? You've got like a marble tabletop right now, Okay, so there's a variety of different things you can do too to play around with this space. All right, I think we'll be able to maybe get into the blending stump and the Q-tip. So we'll do this really quick. So once again, I'm going to go ahead and just lay down a really quick ground with a pencil over the first two planes, and I think we're going to have to re-examine this video or redo this video. What I'm going to do is I'll just finish the video, and if you guys want to watch it later, you can. Or do you want to finish this in class? We'll do a vote.
If we finish it now, and if we can get a photograph of that posted for reference, that would be nice, because it's really pixelated on my end.
Okay. All right. Well, shoot. Okay. I'll have a video posted after class too. I'm filming this whole thing, so you can also refer to the video, but I'll post a photo too for you. Okay.
That'd be perfect. Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay. So we'll do the blending stump, and you can write blending stump on the side too. Let's do. I'll just finish this demo after class and post the video, so if you want to continue watching later on, you can do that too. The big thing with blending stumps, you have a variety of different types of blending stumps. This is just a type of shed paper or shaved paper. Then you also have kind of rolled paper. I tend to like the kind of shaved paper more. That's just kind of my personal preference. But with blending stumps, a lot of people have this tendency of like drawing like this with them, going up and down. I want you to look at maybe the difference here. This is actually a wrong way to use a blending stump. Primarily because when you stop and start your blending stump, you're going to load more material onto the page. But rather, if you work with it in a circular position, you're going to actually be able to continue a continuous blend. So it's actually better to use a blending stump in a rotation or like a circle than it is actually to draw up and down. Now sometimes you might encounter like a line where you have to be a little bit more crisp, and that's okay. Just try to go maybe over it with a circular technique afterwards, or pay more attention to that space as you're working on it. Blending stumps are going to be able to put down a decent amount of material. And you're really going to be able to create some really fine blending here. Often what I do with blending stumps is I tend to go back over them with some mark of my own just to give them a little bit more life. Like I said, they can be a little bit dead. That is a bad quality about them. But you might find areas too where you're in a drawing and let's say, you have a smooth area, or you're working on, a plastic bowl that has like kind of, it's foggy or something, right? We've all seen those kind of like filmy plastic lids or cups or something. You might have a space like that, and that's going to be perfect for a blending stump, so go ahead and use it. Where you might not want to use a blending stump is when you have, texture, right? Like a gritty wall space. If you're drawing a hand, a blending stump's not going to be able to generate that mark as well. You also might have too, like rulers. Look at all the texture here. This would be a terrible decision to use a blending stump here. So think about your blending stump and when you need to apply it, okay? In some areas, like I said, you might need to be able to do a blending stump and then go back over it with parallel lines, especially like rulers like this, where you have a parallel line running through it. Or you might need to, think about how you might need to create blending stumps in certain areas. Or if you want to fill this thing up with total mark and just make it like glorious and you can have something to bite onto, that's also fine. The great thing about drawing is that you are using your own perspective, right? And that's the beautiful thing about art. It's your understanding of space. Now, granted, I'm trying to teach you like techniques to get more observational drawing and more academic styles of drawing, but also some of that also feeds into like how you're conceptually building a space, how you want me to see it, what's your interpretation. So there's this really nice delicate balance and nuance where you can push some of this envelope and some of the content that I'm giving you to direct your meaning a little bit more specifically. All right, I think that's going to bring us to an end of class. Like I said, I'm going to go ahead and finish this video. I'm going to post this after class on that section on Canvas. I'm going to post a picture too for you just to show you what the end result looks like so you'll have a good understanding. And that's going to be it for today. I'll see you guys on Thursday with some lovely images and drawings of your work, okay? All right, have a great night. Bye, everyone.
Fine, thanks.
You're welcome. I'll stay on too for a few minutes if anybody has questions. Okay. All right, so I'll just pick up essentially where I left off. So we've got blending stumps here. That's essentially a reworked kind of area. Like I said, make sure that you use this, in relation to the object. You want the texture to match the form, that content to be deriven from the form, okay? Once again, I'm going to just kind of create some ground on my other two areas. So I'm just going to go back and forth with the pencil. Now that we're out of class, I can go and just finish this drawing and make a little bit nicer grounds on my own time. Sorry, I'm a total cheeseball. I can't help it. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start taking some different tools to create other types of blended techniques. They're going to be very similar to the blending stumps, but have a little bit of subtle nuance and difference. And it's always good to have some kind of play too with your materials. So I'm going to kind of use a Q-tip now, and it's going to be very similar to a blending stump. You're going to be like super like, yeah, that makes total sense. Essentially, blending stumps can be great for creating additional lines. And I'm going to talk about this too with the blending stump and Q-tip to work with it also as not only a blending technique, but also a mark making technique. So we're going to keep this out on the side, and we're also going to do some stuff with the Q-tip after I make this little shading area. But essentially, you're going to use a Q-tip very similar to how you're going to use your blending stump. You're going to work in a rotation kind of pattern, right? Making circles, going back and forth with the circle, going over top, blending that really nicely. And essentially that cotton's really going to grab a lot of that material. You are going to notice a little bit of a value difference between the blending stump and the Q-tip. Primarily your Q-tip's going to be grabbing the material and be a little bit fuzzier. This kind of holds the material on a little bit thicker, primarily just because cotton ball, this is cotton rag paper, so it's going to grab the material a lot more aggressively, and this one's just going to lightly kind of fluffy and hold it on, right? So rather, this is going to be a little bit lighter in value. You're also going to maybe have a little bit more textural kind of powdery forms, so this could be really good for especially drawing sky spaces, even kind of like giving us cloud textures. So it could be really nice for adding some darker value because it's going to feel fluffier, right? So what I was talking about with drawing with your blending stuff, that's actually a really beautiful notion. So I'm going to take my Q-tip over here, and I'm actually just going to create some really nice kind of cloudy forms, if you will. And I'm just going to make some really subtle like marks, kind of just dragging the Q-tip over that space. And you can see I've got some really beautiful marks here that are really soft and delicate, but it feels like a cloud, right? So you can also draw with your blending stumps and your Q-tips as a way to create mark. Now you're going to be able to see my my blending stump puts down a lot more material than my Q-tip, right? I'm able to actually draw with it pretty aggressively and create some really beautiful marks and some even fuzzy areas, right? So go back and forth, not only thinking about your blending stump as a blending tool, but an actual drawing tool to make lighter marks, to make fuzzier marks, and even to think about maybe how you might use them to create different forms. Like this could be a really beautiful like barn in the background where you make this really great barn structure, right? And create some really hardwood lines of a barn going down or cloud spaces with your Q-tips, okay? All right, so we'll go ahead and mark that off too. Stump. Q-tip. All right. After that, we'll go ahead and work over with our brush. So I like to use brushes when I draw quite a bit. They just have some really great blending qualities. Primarily, I like to work with a brush because I think brushes do a better job blending sometimes than blending stumps or Q-tips, meaning that we'll see some of that mark still exist underneath. So it could just be a little bit more of a subtle blend. And so that's why I like always having a drawing blending brush around. And essentially you're going to try to work in somewhat circular motion. You can also kind of go back and forth like a streaky motion. If you're doing any kind of hardwood, often that could be a really beautiful kind of way to create that space. Typically round brushes work better for this. I've just got this kind of bright brush here that I'm using just to kind of, that's because I was using it for creating some landscapes when I was drawing this weekend, but you can also create really beautiful marks. With that brush that way. So you can see kind of the difference here, and it also puts down less material, right? It doesn't lift up as much as your blending stuff or your Q-tip. So also this is a nice gradient scale to understand how the value's working between those three materials. You can also see a lot more line underneath, right? We can see how that's lifting up and also showing some of that mark that exists under that ground plane. And like I said, you can go back over your blended areas and add more texture or more detail. Going back in and adding some cross hatching, or you can even carve back into it in a subtractive drawing method where maybe you lift up certain areas to kind of create rim lighting or highlights or details, right? So also think about too, using these materials and methods in tandem with each other or overlapping them to create more depth, value, and volume in your work. Ah, it's beautiful, right? All right, the last one is going to be paper towels. So we already used a paper towel down here to create charcoal ground for us. So we're going to just go ahead and talk about paper towels. I can spell. All right, we'll go ahead and just talk about paper towels for blending. Once again, I'm going to just take an area of my paper towel, fold it over my finger like so. I'm using a Viva paper towel. I'm going to advertise for them like Vanna White right now. Essentially, I just like to fold it over my finger and create a nice little pad, and then I'll just go to town with it. I like to do this in kind of a, I would recommend maybe a rotational pattern, but honestly, paper towels you can do a lot with. You can just like go back and forth, and that's totally fine. So you'll have a really nice even dispersal with paper towels. Notice once again, it is the lightest of the values. So also all four of these are also going to transmit, hold, and present the material in a very different value fashion as well as mark fashion. So this is why I like to teach you this plethora of blending techniques, because all four of those things can do different things, present different surface qualities and textures in the work. And like I said, you can always go back into them and go over them with other marks and other techniques that we learned down here, or you do subtractive drawing techniques with the stuff that we just did down here. So it's always good to kind of play around with those forms. All right, I'm going to try to lift up some of that charcoal as it's smudging around. And once again, all of these techniques that I'm demonstrating here can all be done with charcoal, right? And I'm just using graphite primarily because it's a little bit cleaner and I'm not getting my hands as dirty, although I just did that and it's getting my hands pretty dirty now. And like I said, the gradient for like the 2H to 9B little demonstration that I did over here, it might not be as like wide scale on graphite as it is to charcoal, but you might still have some variation with charcoal from that hard, medium to soft range. So just be aware your harder charcoals are going to put down less material. You're going to be able to get really fine, crisp lines with them. Your medium charcoals are going to be able to put down a medium range of materials. You'll be able to get a softer mark, but also you can still kind of control it and creep a sharper edge. Your softer marks or your softer materials, those are going to put down a darker, richer, blacker mark, and it'll also wear down a little bit faster, so you might have to sharpen more, okay? So once again, this is a complicated little slew here of a lot of different techniques, and granted, we didn't even go into all of the mark-making techniques that you can get into, but this is a good range on some beginning techniques and how you can maybe start to add in together and think about all these varieties of different forms. Okay, so the last thing that we're going to talk about is thinking about the way you hold your pencil. And we talked about this in class before quite a bit, but I want you to think about edge quality and how you're holding and positioning your body and also your hand with your material. So we'll think about just the space of a material. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just draw with my 8B here. I'm going to go sharpen this real quick. All right. So I've got a fine point that I can actually work with. So I'm going to draw with this pretty much directly straight down on the point. All right, so you can see what that does, what that looks like. I've got a decent amount of loaded material. It's pretty dark. It's also totally not straight because I'm drawing directly down. It's going to give me a little bit more of a ragged line. If I start to draw with it at an angle, it becomes a much more confident line, very strong, a lot straighter actually than my kind of jagged mark that I did straight down, right? And then if I start to kind of vary my mark and change my angle of my hand, and notice how I'm pushing my hand further down the pencil body, I'm actually able to expose more lead. So I can get a variety of different marks too with just how I'm actually positioning my body with my material. Now, of course, this is also going to range if you're working with different charcoals. I tend to work with charcoal pencils quite a bit, so the same information is going to apply with my charcoal pencil. Now, obviously, if you're working with graphite or your charcoal, vine charcoal, you're going to have different variations. You can draw with the side of your charcoal, draw directly down, or kind of draw with big, large chunks where you put this completely flat against your paper and just draw with big marks. So this is also going to kind of range too, depending upon the materials that you choose with charcoal. But the same information could be directly extrapolated. So this is going to be essentially the conclusion of our demo here. Hopefully this has kind of been helpful for giving you some varieties and techniques for working with different shading and blending techniques, as well as thinking about hand pressure, position of material, thinking about material quality and what you might need to use in terms of scaling for hardness or blackness on your material scale, thinking about mark techniques that you can use to create all of that luscious information, or thinking about blending and how you might create grounds for both of your drawings for darker value planes. So once again, hopefully this is helpful. I'm going to go ahead and just put ground here. And that's going to go ahead and conclude this little video demo. Hopefully this is helpful. Feel free to watch, review, and all that good stuff. All right. Have a good night.